Well, lo and behold, Rhett Lashlee and Paul Finebaum make it up.
You are Locked On SMU, your daily podcast on the SMU Mustangs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another edition of Locked On SMU here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. Thank you for making me part of your day. As, boy, yesterday's episode was really fun, and I think we're going to get the culmination of all of that here today. So that coming up for you in just 1 second. Also coming up on the show, Kevin Jennings is on the Maxwell Award Watchlist for 2025, along with 17 ACC players. What does that say about SMU's schedule? We'll talk about it. And also, I'm going to give you your first recruiting update from the 2027 class, as a four-star quarterback has SMU in his top 4 as he nears a college decision. So all that coming up here on the podcast. Again, my name is Grayson Singleton. Go ahead and give me a follow on X at Gray_Singleton2, and also subscribe to this YouTube page so we can continue to grow this Locked On SMU community. All right, let's go ahead and start with the big ticket story surrounding SMU today, and that is the head coach went on the Paul Finebaum show after Paul Finebaum last Friday called SMU the most corrupt program in college football history. Now, if you missed my reaction to that, that was on Monday's episode. So go back to Monday's episode and you can find my reaction to that. I led off the show with reacting to Paul Finebaum, using that to describe SMU. But today, Coach Lashlee made an appearance on the Paul Finebaum show, and this is what he had to say, quote, "I'm not necessarily saying the ACC is better or worse. I think the SEC is a league I really respect. It's done great things, but we're in a day and age where, unfortunately, we're forced to politic, almost like it's a contest or a pageant to get into the playoff. When that's the case, if one league is considered to maybe need preferential treatment for bids because of their depth, we've got to look at the facts. It's not a comparison of league versus league. I think that argument is not the reason. I think each year teams should stand on their own production and success." I'm going to go ahead and give myself a pat on the back for this, because when this first came out that Rhett Lashlee took the supposed shot at the SEC, and for the audio listening audience, I just put that in air quotes. When it first came out that he made that statement, go back to my reaction last week. I said it sounded like he's politicking here for the conference, like he's going to bat for the ACC, basically asking the question, wait, why do we get treated like the inferior conference? Why do we get substandard treatment here as it pertains to who gets into the college football playoff? And he is dead accurate. At my day job, we have a saying called dead on balls accurate. And he is dead on balls accurate here. Because with the way that the college football playoff is structured, with the way you have to go to a committee, and let's be real, the committee thinks, because they're humans, like all of us do, precedent has a lot to do with who they select to get into the college football playoff. The allure and the precedent of your conference has a lot to do with that. Strength of schedule, even though we have a bunch of different methods with which we calculate it, and there's FPI and all this other stuff, it's still a very subjective thing. So when Rhett Lashlee says we have to figure out a way to get the committee out of it, like he said last week also, and then follows it up by saying, yeah, we do have to politic to get spots into the college football playoff, this whole thing starts to make sense. And I love that I record these shows later on in the day. If you guys don't know my schedule, I record these shows at about 6 o'clock Central Time for the next day. And the reason I love that I do this is because I get to let things that happen in the middle of the day kind of marinate, right? We don't get to do it with breaking news on live radio, but you can hear. And when I thought about it, I think Rhett Lashlee is such a calculated individual that I was like, there's got to be something behind here. And then I came to the conclusion, wait, he's actually going to bat for the ACC. He's not out here trying to stir up drama by saying weird stuff or outlandish stuff. But what he's trying to shed a light on is, hey, our conference has teams that are just as good as these SEC teams that can go to war with these SEC teams and put on a compelling product in a college football playoff game. So why are we being shafted here? Now, if you just isolate that to 2025 and you look at the teams who are at the top of the conferences, you've got in the ACC, Clemson, Miami, SMU, a gap, and then Georgia Tech, Louisville, and then another gap before we get to Duke, Syracuse, Florida State, and the rest of the conference. In the SEC, that tier 1 alone is bigger than any of the ACC teams we think can compete for championships, because the tier 1 in the SEC is Texas, Georgia, Alabama, LSU, and then even a team like Florida could end up being just as good as SMU. A team like Oklahoma could end up being as good as SMU. So right now, the SEC is a deeper conference, but that's not necessarily the point. And I think where Rhett Lashlee messed up here is because when you're trying to communicate to people who are writing stories and who are going to end up pushing your narratives, they're doing that to people who don't necessarily think as deep as we're doing with this podcast. That's the difference between fans and people who actually who cover the stuff, is that a lot of times fans are going to take things at face value, which is why I pushed back on Paul Finebaum yesterday, because I think as a member of the media, you should take a step back and think about exactly what might be the actual message here, instead of bringing up things that happened in 1987. That's why I thought what Paul Finebaum said, calling SMU the most corrupt program in college football history, number one, is just factually inaccurate, and number two, wasn't warranted. But when Lashlee went on to Finebaum, which, by the way, I'll commend Paul Finebaum for this, they had a very, very cordial conversation. And I think it was a productive one, and I actually enjoyed watching it back when I did. But when Lashlee goes on to Finebaum, which is, by the way, is an SEC show. It is an SEC slanted show. We've all known Paul Finebaum, the mouth of the South. Most of his coverage is done in the SEC. But when he goes on to this and says, hey, look, the system's broken, and here's how the system's broken, because I can appreciate a good, structured, articulated argument for why something is broken. And he went on there and said, hey, look, this is what we got to do. It's almost like a pageant or something. We can put our best resume forward, but when it comes to the ACC, and I think the Big 12 too, and it's easier to do it with the Big 12 because that conference doesn't have Texas and Oklahoma in it now, it is so easy, and we subliminally, sometimes subconsciously, start to scrutinize the resumes of the ACC and the Big 12. Because if you come out of the Big 10 the champion, if you come out of the SEC the champion, it is realized and understood what kind of a gauntlet you went through to get to that point. By the way, the Big 10's really top heavy too. The SEC, not so much. The Big 10's kind of top heavy. We got Oregon, Ohio State, Michigan had a down year last year, so we can't really count them. We don't know what they'll be with the true freshman quarterback. But you had Oregon, Ohio State, Penn State, and then an Indiana team that backdoored its way into the college football playoff and got curb stomped. And also got their doors blown off at Ohio State, even though a lot of people did. But outside of those teams, what else really is the Big Ten that, by the way, has 14 to 16 teams now? You want the definition of top heavy, by the way. I know the SEC is an easier target because their scheduling system sucks. I understand that that's why they're the easier target. But if you want a conference that's really top heavy, and we don't talk about how top heavy they are, that's that conference that encapsulates most of the Midwest. That's the Big Ten. That's the top heavy conference. But when you see that and you see, yeah, we got to politic and we got to do this stuff. Politicians do this all the time. By the way, college coaches do this all the time to influence things. They will drop little seeds out there, and eventually that will catch on in somebody's brain. And come decision time, it could make an impact on who gets in and who gets left out. But the ultimate problem in all of this is the fact that we are still trying to determine a national championship, and now with the expanded playoff, determining the participants in a tournament that determines the national championship on subjectivity. We are still leaving this in the hands of humans who have human bias, and it's in the hands of a committee instead of just going off of raw record. And because of how college football is, with the way that we don't have one central league, there really is no way to alleviate that problem. But calling out the deficiencies of it, even though in a little bit of a quirky way, is never something that I am going to fault a coach for. So good on Rhett Lashlee, good on Paul Finebaum for making up with this and having an excellent, cordial conversation that they had on the Paul Finebaum show today. I love every part of it. And coming up next, we're going to talk about something that could enhance the resume of SMU as their quarterback ends up on the Maxwell Award Watchlist along with 16 other players from the conference. Stay tuned. Time to fuel up and turn it up with 5-Hour Energy Transfusion. It brings the bold grape, ginger, and lime flavor of your favorite golf drink, minus the alcohol, into a quick, energizing shot. Whether you're sinking birdies or just making memories with friends, this one is a hole-in-one for your energy game. Hey, let's be honest. Some days on the course or off of it, you just need that little extra boost to stay sharp and energized. Think of the wildest shot you've ever made in golf. Was it a total fluke? Was it a well-calculated miracle? I don't know. Whatever it is, it was great because golf is all about good times with good people and good flavors, of course. The grape ginger lime flavor gives you the best parts of your clubhouse go-to without chasing down the Bev cart. So if you go to 5hourenergy.com today, that is the number 5hourenergy.com, you can use my promo code LOCKEDONGOLF to receive 20% off your order. This offer is only valid until September 30th on one order and cannot be used with other promos. The code is not good on subscription orders. So whether you're meeting up with friends or trying to turn 18 holes into 36, get the energizing boost you need to power through. Order transfusion-flavored 5-Hour Energy shots today. Back here on a Tuesday edition of Locked On SMU. Thanks for hanging out with me. I'm Grayson Singleton. And remember, since you made it this far, go ahead and hit that subscribe button so we can continue to grow this Locked On SMU channel. Click the notification bell as well. That way you can get notified whenever we release new content. We got new content coming out every Monday through Friday at 8 a.m. on the podcast side, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast, and noon Central Time on YouTube. Okay, so the Maxwell Award Watchlist was released this afternoon. As a matter of fact, it was released right as I was walking out of the gym. And perfect timing because Kevin Jennings finds himself on this list. Now, to me, this says one thing. We're going to take this segment two different ways. The first is that I don't think SMU is going to be some sort of undertold story anymore. Teams aren't going to overlook SMU. They're also not going to overlook a quarterback who you probably could easily overlook, because nothing that he did last year was spectacular. He was just good, sometimes really good, and you can see the potential and see the promise that could come with development. But he never did anything that, knocked your socks off in a way that people were like, oh, we got to pay attention to that. I don't think that happened last year. But if he's on the award list and everybody knows it, now everybody knows, we got to get up for him. We got to get up for that offense, and we got to get up for SMU. And I think people already knew that they had to get up for SMU because regardless of what your schedule is never going to be weak enough for you to cakewalk to an undefeated conference schedule. That just doesn't happen. And it's pretty impossible, especially in the sport of football where injuries are aplenty. And you saw with SMU, their star tight end went down last year in the middle of the year, RJ Merrill. So if there were any people left in the college football world who are just being negligent in their research that thought, oh yeah, maybe Kevin Jennings is a dude that's going to be an underdog and he's going to be a dude that we'll game plan for, but we're not going to put that red eye on him. Well, he's on the Maxwell Award list now. And before you come out and say, yeah, everybody makes the Maxwell Award watch list at the beginning of the year, no, they don't. No, they don't. Because everybody here on this list that represents the ACC is deserving of it. And this is the second direction I'm going to take this segment. Because in the ACC, by the way, let's talk about this for a second. If you think the ACC is an inferior conference to the rest of the conferences in the Power Four, the other three, if you think the ACC is just some wildly superior to the Big Ten or the SEC, which I think that in a hierarchy, you'd put them below it, but not wildly below it. There are 17 players from the ACC on the Maxwell Award Watchlist. That is the most in the country among conferences. Here are some of the guys that SMU is going to play that are on the Maxwell Award preseason watch list. Cade Klubnik, probably the most obvious one, quarterback at Clemson. Also, his top wide receiver, Antonio Williams, is on this list. Miller Moss is on this list. I expect he'll drop off of that pretty fast. But his running back in the backfield, Isaac Brown, is on this list. Carson Beck, quarterback in Miami, is on this list. Then you've got Kevin Jennings. And then you've got Damon Claiborne, the running back from Wake Forest. So I said this the other day. If SMU is to get back to the college football playoff, given the schedule in the regular year that they have, given that they would probably have at worst played for an ACC championship game, hopefully they win it, they would have earned their way back to the college football playoff. And I think this just continues to prove it, is that if SMU does this again, there's no fluke here, because the guys that they have to go through to do this are incredible. And the Maxwell Award, it doesn't look like takes into account defensive players, because I have no idea if it does. I have no idea how TJ Parker, the defensive lineman from Clemson, is not on this list, because TJ Parker is a problem. He is a problem, I tell you. So there are guys that are not on this list that are going to make it an issue, that are going to make an issue for SMU just by virtue of them being good players. But Cade Klubnik and Antonio Williams are on this list for Clemson. Carson Beck, who again, I still think has some really good college football left to be played, is on this list. So SMU has no cakewalk. And if you go from the teams that they played last year, there were dudes on those teams too. So it goes back to the heavy scrutinizing of schedules. Can we just recognize good for good? Sure, some years you're going to have a schedule where you don't play the toughest of competition. But SMU beat two ranked teams in ACC play, Louisville and Pitt. They hung with Clemson and then, got killed by a superior Penn State team. That happened. But nobody put you in the final field of 12 for no reason. And the team did go 8-0. 8-0. I think it's reasonable to expect that given the schedule, SMU doesn't get into the playoffs with one loss. So they had a very narrow way of getting into the college football playoff last year, and they executed and did it. I think that deserves a lot more praise than it's getting. So all I'm saying here is that at every single turn, we are finding more and more and more ways to back up the fact that SMU is a real competitor here. The fact that last year wasn't a one-hit wonder. Now, they've got to still go out and prove my prognostication, obviously. But that's the more that these things come up, the more that I realize, they actually did some really good things last year. Was it against the toughest conference slate? No. There's no way to argue that it is. But I don't think that you need to continue to go ahead and heavily cut through and scrutinize everything. Except for what it was. They ran the table. And they can do the same this year. Do I think they will run the table this year? I think there's a loss in there. But if you win the rest of those games, they're back in. They are back in the college football playoff. And that didn't include, by the way, the out-of-conference guys that are on that list. Because I would not be shocked if John Hoover showed up on that list. I would not be shocked if Sawyer Robinson popped up on that list. I wouldn't. I wouldn't be surprised if a guy like Alabama transfer who ended up at Baylor, Kobe Prentice, the wide receiver, shows up on that list. They're going to play some good players who are coached by good coaches, who are good teams. Let's go out and run it. Let's go out and run it. And SMU is going to have the same improvement that those other teams have. All right, one more segment to go here on this Tuesday edition of Locked On SMU. Let's get into recruiting. We're going to talk about the 2027 class for the first time on this show, and I've got some pretty good news for you. Well, it could be good news. We'll talk about it next. Final segment here on Locked On SMU, closing up shop on a Tuesday. Recruiting, the thing that SMU fans should feel excited the most about, because SMU right now is in a battle for four-star quarterback from Benton, Louisiana, Malachi Ziegler. And this came out from our friends at Rivals that Malachi Ziegler is down to 4 schools. He is down to Baylor, Mississippi State, Michigan, and SMU. Let's try to go through process of elimination here. We don't expect much from Mississippi State, even though Jeff Levy is a really good recruiter, I think. And I think Jeff Levy is a good coach. But there's not much for him to work with there. And I don't think Mississippi State is going to be very good in 2025. So maybe that's just a negative enough impression to scratch the Bulldogs off this list. The one that I'm keeping an eye on, to be honest, is Baylor. Michigan signed the number 1 quarterback in last year's class, actually the number 1 player in the class last year in Bryce Underwood. He's going to be the starter this year. So with him there, and then him having to come back for another year, actually another 2 years at minimum, I don't know if it makes the most business sense for Malachi Ziegler to go there, especially if he wants to play early. And when I say early, I mean within 2 years. So that leaves SMU and Baylor. Now, SMU, you could apply that same logic because SMU in the 2024 class signed Ty Hawkins. In the 2025 class, they signed Ty Hawkins out of IMG. In the 2026 class, they are poised to sign Cole Leinert, 3-star quarterback. And then in the 2027 class, you're going after Malachi Ziegler. Baylor is the one I am hotly concerned about because this is what Ziegler had to say about Baylor. Quote, "I love Coach Rhett Holcomb. He and Coach Jake Spavital, are all amazing guys, and I was able to get in a few conversations with Coach Aranda. All 3 expressed to me the same thought process. They really like me and everything I'm about, and that's exciting for me. It's amazing, especially after this." Okay, cool. Baylor is an interesting one because when Dave Aranda gets involved with recruitments, it usually has a decent chance of going Baylor's direction. And as was reported by rival Sam Spiegelman, Ziegler has been a top priority, not just for the offensive staff, but for Dave Aranda himself. So Dave Aranda has been involved in this one. I'll give you an example. Dave Aranda was heavily involved in the recruitment of 4-star wide receiver Jordan Clay in the 2026 class. Baylor outfoxes Oklahoma and others for Jordan Clay. Baylor's also going toe-to-toe with Oklahoma and Florida for Davian Gross, 4-star athlete out of Frisco, Texas. So keep an eye on that one. If they're able to double up with Clay and Gross, and Aranda was involved heavily in both of those, that you might be onto something with Baylor. But Aranda himself is a pretty good recruiter. But as it pertains to SMU, here's what Ziegler had to say about the Mustangs. Now, Ziegler was in for a visit with the Mustangs this spring, and he's got a good relationship with quarterback coach De'Aaron King. I still can't believe I'm saying Coach De'Aaron King because I remember when that dude was slinging it at Miami. Ziegler said, quote, "SMU was really cool to me. Coach King is a good coach. He's down to earth. He understands. He recently played college ball for Coach Lashlee. He's had success in the offense. He played in the offense, and now he's coaching the offense. Having that insight is really huge." And I think that's an astute point made by Ziegler because the continuity between the coach and the quarterback, who is now the offensive mind, but he's the quarterback coach, I think can really build synergy and help this whole thing gel. So I think they've got a good system in place and a good structure in place that could lure Ziegler. Obviously, we know SMU is going to be able to pay the requisite dollars if they want to for Ziegler. But let me tell you about Ziegler in and of itself. That's SMU's pitch, and I think it's a good one. Also, by the way, before I get to Ziegler, Coach Lashlee being as bold as he's been, politicking for his conference, politicking for his school, that I think that can look pretty good in the eyes of a player. I think that sort of mentality of, I don't give a you-know-what, I'm just going to say what I need to say to stand up for the people I want to stand up for, I think that appeals to 17 and 18-year-olds. I really think it does. Now, for Ziegler himself, he's an interesting prospect because he's got a rocket of an arm. He's got a rocket of an arm and a really good, crisp, quick release. He throws a good ball. He is highly athletic, very athletic. Now, he doesn't have a whole lot of straight line speed. He's a 4.8 guy in the 40, but he's a big, strong kid, 6'3", 205, heading into his junior year. 250 on the bench. Guys just bounce off of him. Some guys look like they don't even want to tackle him. He's going to be a really strong, big quarterback. Right now, and again, he's going into his junior year. I cannot overstate that enough. Right now, he's got fundamental things to clean up, as does most people going into their junior year of high school at quarterback. But he's a guy to watch in terms of how do they develop his footwork at Benton High School in Louisiana? How do they develop, some of his processing? I think he's a smart kid, really intelligent player of the game. He feels pressure really well, moves well within the pocket, but also can escape. But rocket arm, mobile, big, strong. Fundamental issues so far, my college comp for him would be Anthony Richardson. When I was watching his tape, I don't do a whole lot of, I'm going to go through everything and I'm going to pour through all this. When I come up with my comps, it's the first person that comes to mind when I watch a dude. And the first person that comes to mind is Florida Gator Anthony Richardson right now. Big, strong guy, can run over dudes in the secondary, rocket of an arm. Fundamentals need to be cleaned up. I'm sure they will get better as he goes through a junior and senior year of high school. But if SMU can land this dude, and especially if Kevin Jennings shows progression and improvement on the things he needs to improve, that will help you in terms of landing Malachi Ziegler. Now, Ziegler is nearing a decision in the coming weeks, so you may not have that runway to say, hey, look at what we do with Kevin Jennings, but it's a 2027 kid, so you never know if the recruitment is actually going to be over. But that's one to keep an eye on. By the way, tomorrow, SMU is involved in another highly, highly sought-after prospect in the 2027 class, but we will talk about that tomorrow on Wednesday's show. Thanks so much for watching Locked On SMU and for making us your first listen of the day. For your second listen of the day, be sure to go check out the portal with our man, Brian Smith, who's got all the latest happenings in the world of college football, and you're going to be the most informed fan if you go check out Locked On's The Portal. We will talk to you tomorrow afternoon. Take it easy, everybody.